I delivered my baby, Lorcan, through a Category 1 emergency C-section after a 12-hour labour, which resulted in complications with baby before he was born. Fortunately, I was lucky to be able to deliver Lorcan, and after resuscitation, he was healthy. But unfortunately, I went on to suffer a major postpartum hemorrhage. All attempts and methods to stop the bleeding failed, and I continued to hemorrhage, losing all of my own blood, plus a substantial amount from the ongoing blood transfusions. In total, I lost around 8 to 9 litres, and so I had to be placed under general anaesthetic, whilst the medical team attempted every option to stop the bleeding and to try and save my life. While I was under that general anaesthetic, it became clear that it was unlikely that I would survive without a major intervention, and so an emergency hysterectomy was performed in order to save my life and stop the bleeding, which I was lucky that it did go on to save me, and the bleeding did stop. I was placed in an induced coma and transferred to the ICU unit, intensive care, whilst Lorcan and my husband were moved to the postnatal ward. I was able to self-rouse myself from my coma. That was roughly after 16 hours after having given birth to Lorcan. And that was great because Lorcan had already made it through all the colostrum I had prenatally harvested. I'd actually prenatally harvested around 60 syringes of colostrum, and he was a very hungry little boy. So in that time, he made his way through quite a lot of that prenatal harvesting colostrum. I felt really lucky that I'd roused myself, as the intention was to leave me in the induced coma for a full 3 days. And breastfeeding was quite a high priority to me when I was pregnant and thinking about how I was going to feed my baby once he was born. We spent a total of 10 days in the hospital, progressing from intensive care through to a high dependency unit in midwifery and eventually to postnatal before we were able to go home with Lorcan. And I coalesced at home for a long time afterwards, suffering with the weakness and the trauma and the impact to my body. This picture captures the first time that I met and held Lorcan after having roused myself from the induced coma, and it really brings to mind a lot of the mix of emotions that I felt at that time. The joy and the delight, the wonder and the magic of holding my first and only son, my first child, and this beautiful newborn who, you have so much hope and magic at the time when you're pregnant and then go on to deliver them, was coupled with this raw reality of what had happened to me post my birth, and the experience of having woken up in a really not the situation that I anticipated. Yeah, everything was really scary, being in, intensive care in the ICU unit, really disorientating, experiencing quite a deep psychosis from the sedation. This beauty of having met your child, and what will be my only child, for the very first time, was met with this confusion of not really understanding what had happened to me or what that meant for my future, the extreme pain and discomfort I was in, and the feelings of kind of loss and grief, or the immediacy of kind of not really understanding the loss and grief that was to come from having my uterus removed whilst under general anaesthetic, and unbeknownst to me that that was the decision that was going to have to be made in order to save my life, coupled alongside with this gratefulness for having made it and being alive. I think you just don't ever anticipate going into hospital to give birth, which, you think is going to be one of the most happiest, joyous days of your life, to go into what felt like at times being in a nightmare, and all the trauma that goes alongside that. After meeting and holding Lorcan for the first time, I was able to establish breastfeeding, and this image is when we went on to successfully breastfeed after for our very first time, and that was due to the support of the infant feeding team at North Manchester Great General Hospital, something I feel so privileged and grateful for, despite the circumstances around our birth. And those early days were extremely tricky with all the wires I was attached to, and in this image you can see where I'd been intubated. I had a feeding tube in my nose, a central line, cannulas and various monitors all attached to various parts of my body and arms, which made positioning and holding Lorcan extremely difficult. I was also extremely weak from the blood loss and the major surgeries I'd been through. And also Lorcan was kept in a separate ward on postnatal while I was in intensive care, ICU. So he had to be brought to me when healthcare professionals were able to. So all of this image really captures all of that time when kind of it was extremely difficult to hold Lorcan, but the magic of holding him was so beautiful. Breastfeeding became a crucial part of our relationship and bond, and particularly in those early days and months. And I was so pleased that we were able to do that.